Being here, I'm Zach Klein, Columbus City Attorney. On a great day, an opportunity for important announcements of what the city now has in front of us as a chance to really take another more significant bite out of gun violence in the city of Columbus. I know many of you are familiar with Ohio Revised Code 9.68. Just a real quick refresher course. The state of Ohio passed the Ohio Revised Code 9.68. It's our state preemption law that prohibits cities like Columbus from really doing anything associated with the regulation or legislative action associated with firearms. And it's fairly encompassing. It was passed originally about a decade and a half ago. It was amended recently. But in a recent case involving the city of Dayton and red light camera, the city of Dayton challenged the ability for it to regulate red light cameras, and the Ohio Supreme Court changed the way that it looked at state preemption and home rule. And that gave the city of Columbus an opportunity to challenge this particular firearm preemption law. And we have been successful. We filed a lawsuit back in 2019, and over the course of the past 3.5 years, been patiently waiting for us to get a ruling. We're proud to say that, as many of you covered, we were successful. And there is a preliminary injunction in place that allows and gives the city this important window of opportunity. An important window of opportunity to think about a legislative strategy associated with gun violence, associated with gun safety measures, to tackle violent crime in our community. This was not possible until a few weeks ago, or until last week. It was not possible until the judge ruled in our favor under this new analysis to give us a chance to do this. And I'm sure, as you'll hear from our speakers here today, the mayor and council president, members of council, and doctors who work in this space all the time, the reality is the city of Columbus has done a tremendous amount to deal with gun violence in our community, investing in law enforcement officers, investing in violence interrupters, investing in people, investing in our police department. Those are all really important things, and we've seen the results of a dramatic decrease in homicides. We've seen a dramatic increase in violent crime in our community. But the reality is, what's been missing for decades is a legislative strategy that we now have the ability to have that communication and conversation with our friends, our faith leaders, and our residents about what we can do legislatively to add to that important piece of the puzzle to tackle gun violence in our community. I think the reality is, in states like Ohio, and this is not my opinion, it's a study done out of Johns Hopkins University, in states like Ohio, where the legislatures, Republican-driven legislatures, red states, that have opened the floodgates for guns to be dumped on our streets, ranging from excessive number of handguns to AR-15s, we've seen a 10% increase across the country in violent crime, because of the actions that state legislatures and Republican-dominated states have done. Now, we as city leaders have the responsibility to respond, but oftentimes it's like flying a kite in a hurricane, because we're going against the deluge of guns that are being dumped on our streets because of Republican policies at the State House. But now we have the opportunity, with the leadership of Mayor Ginther, Council President Hardin, and the Division of Police, to figure out how we can have a pragmatic, common sense approach to improve the quality of life for every single resident in the city of Columbus, and to make our community safer, whether that's everyday gun violence or that's suicide prevention with a firearm. And we are here with this opportunity to do it. So at that point, I'm going to turn it over to the great mayor of this city, Mayor Andy Ginther.
Good afternoon, and thank you, City Attorney Klein, and for all those that have joined us here today. Neighbors, we have a crisis on our hands. And it is time for us to act. There's been plenty of talk. There's been plenty of study. There's been plenty of debate. Gun violence is robbing our city of our most vital asset, our people. It's not a political statement. That is a fact. 91% of the homicides in our city last year were committed with a firearm. Gun violence is a public health crisis. First time in America's history. Last year, more children died at the hands of guns than traffic accidents. It is time for us to act. And even though our homicides are down by more than 30% year to date over last year and 15% from 2020, thanks to the incredible hard work of our police officers and the community who have stepped up to stop the violence. We've invested heavily in police officers and technology like body-worn cameras to help them do their jobs. And we've started and expanded programs like the Right Response Unit to better address mental health and addiction emergency calls. For the last 2 years, we've invested unprecedented dollars towards the safety and engagement of young people during the summer to make up for some of what they lost during the pandemic and to keep them on the right track. But much of what we have done to implement common sense gun legislation has been thwarted by gun manufacturers flanked by an arm of lobbyists who have convinced the courts that the framers of the Constitution intended mass murder and senseless daily taking of life to be protected speech. Today, we're fighting back. The time for talk is over. The time for study is over. It is time to act. Not to strip people of their guns, but to put reasonable limits on the type of gun you may own, how you can purchase that weapon, how much ammunition you can use, and how to keep others safe from guns in storage. In a few minutes, City Council will detail new legislation they are presenting to limit magazine size, restrict unauthorized people from selling guns, and promote safe storage of all guns. But we're also exploring ways to go even further and impose every possible restriction on assault-style weapons in our community. Consider this. Assault-style weapons can fire more bullets far faster than manual action rifles. In the Dayton mass shooting in 2019, the suspect fired more than 100 rounds, killing 9 people in just 32 seconds. The people of Dayton called for action as they mourned and buried the dead. Do something. And here we are. It's time to lead and to act. When an assault weapon and/or high-capacity magazine is used in a public mass shooting, nearly 14 times as many people are injured and twice as many people are killed. Not only are there more injuries when assault weapons are used, but the types of injuries are far worse. In a few minutes, Dr. Despande from Grand Hospital will tell you what happens when a human body is hit with an assault weapon. But suffice to say, the incredible trauma makes survival difficult. Make no mistake, assault-style weapons are weapons of war. They are not for personal safety or sport. You don't need an AR-15 to protect yourself, your home, and your family. Their only purpose is to maximum injury and death as quickly as possible. So far, just this year, the Division of Police has confiscated almost 3,000 guns. Of them, nearly 200 were assault-style weapons. We've seen what assault-style weapons can do right here in our community. 21-year-old Kevin Sabansky, an honor student from Mahoning Valley, student, Youngstown State University, was killed in the crossfire of a shooting in which he wasn't even involved, just stopping to get gas. This is what AR-15s are doing in our community. Almost a year ago, Charles Wade and Demetrius London Walneal, 9 and 6 years old. were gunned down by assault weapon fire. As we explore our options on restricting assault weapons, we will also continue to push for additional common sense gun legislation, including universal background checks and red flag laws. These are not partisan issues. 80% of voters, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, liberal, conservative, all agree these common sense gun safety laws can help protect children and families. The safety of our community is on the line, and we will do everything in our power to keep our neighborhoods safe from the dangers of high-capacity firearms and shady firearms sellers. The time for talk is over. It is time to act, and Columbus will be leading the way. Please welcome Council President Shannon Hardin.
Thank you, Mayor Ginther. Thank you to our city attorney. It's an honor to be standing here today with the men and women on the front lines of this work, our police officers, our firefighters, our health officials who, as the mayor said, see the carnage up front daily. I also am extremely proud to be here with my colleagues who you will hear from shortly, the chair of the Criminal Justice Committee and the chair of the Safety Committee, Councilmembers Favor and Councilmember Remy, who will lead this legislative process over the coming weeks. I've had the honor of serving on City Council with Mayor Ginther, with City Attorney Zach Klein. Since I joined City Council more than 8 years ago, we've been talking about this issue. We've been researching options as long as I've been here. And we've seen a lot change over those years of service, but one thing that has not changed is the impact of guns on families in our city. It's devastating every time we get a call, we see on the news another community member is killed in our neighborhoods. Every time a child accidentally picks up a gun in their family's home and pulls that trigger, every time a mother answers the door and our police officers have to deliver the craziest news, that their child is not coming home. It's heartbreaking, it's tragic, and it all ties together at the gun. There are simply too many on the streets in the hands of folks who should not have them. While we've had assault weapons banned in this city and nationally, politicians from the radical right have stripped those rights away and our laws away. And we've seen the tragic impacts every time cities tried to take basic steps to limit access to guns. The State House was there to protect criminals and gun makers every time. I'm tired of calling mothers when their teenagers were found dead. I'm tired of hearing the pain that cannot be healed. Almost every time, as the mayor said, it's by a gun, meaning every time it did not have to happen. City Council will work through our Judiciary and Safety Committee to consider these proposals while we can act. Even if the window is brief, we will be damned if we don't use it. We will advance the ordinance and offer a public process that actually listens to the families affected by gun violence. No one is interested in taking away guns from law-abiding citizens. So let's just say that again. No one, none of the leaders behind me, the mayor said it, the city attorney said it. We are not interested in taking guns away from law-abiding citizens. But in our city, we need to stand up against the gun madness that is ruling the State House, that is limiting our ability to lead our community, to protect our community. They fail us in Columbus neighborhoods. They failed, as the mayor said, the families in Dayton, just as the same zealots have failed families across the nation at every school shooting. Listening is our job as elected officials, and we will listen, but then we will act. To tell you more about the specific legislation, our timeline for how we will move forward, is the chair of our Criminal Justice Committee, Councilmember Shayla Favor.
Thank you, Council President Harden, Mayor Ginther, City Attorney Klein. Good afternoon. My name is Shayla Favor, and I have the honor of chairing the Criminal Justice and Judiciary Committee. A few months before I joined Council in 2019 was a day that Ohio communities will always remember. Just miles outside of this community in Dayton, Ohio, my hometown, an armed gunman headed to the Oregon Entertainment District and proceeded to carry out a mass shooting in which 9 people were killed and 27 people were injured in just 30 seconds. Since then, numerous additional mass shootings have taken place. And right here in Columbus, we have seen how gun violence has ripped through our communities, and especially amongst our youth. The number of gun violence-related deaths is not a number we should see on the rise year after year. This is not a standard we should be okay with. We should not be afraid to send our children to school or a community center. We shouldn't be afraid of going to the movies or to a concert. We shouldn't be afraid to go grocery shopping. We are tired. Gun control simply cannot wait. And as Mayor Ginther has stated, we must act now. Despite this, the Ohio legislature has steadily relaxed state gun laws, and our federal lawmakers continue to do nothing. In 2018, the Ohio General Assembly passed amended bill, House Bill 228, which made gun amendments to Section 9.68 of the revised code. This amendment limited cities' ability to adopt gun control laws that are stricter than the state law. The city then sued, arguing that these new amendments violated the city's ability to properly exercise its municipal home rule powers, to exercise our city's duty to protect our community from gun violence. Now, as Attorney Zach Klein already highlighted, on November 3rd, just last week, Judge McIntosh issued a preliminary injunction blocking the existing Ohio law. Since I joined City Council, we have been working on a legislative package to pass common sense gun reform in our community. Today, I am extremely excited to announce 3 pieces of legislation that will move us closer to a safer Columbus. First, we defined large capacity magazine as any magazine, belt, drum, feed strip, clip, or another similar device that has the capacity of or can be readily restored or converted to accept 30 or more rounds of ammunition for use in a firearm. This definition does not include any of the following. Number 1, a feeding device that has been permanently altered so that it cannot accommodate more than 10 rounds of ammunition. Number 2, a .22 caliber tube ammunition feeding device. Number 3, a tubular magazine that is contained in a lever action firearm. Number 4, a magazine that is permanently inoperable. This legislation will prohibit the possession of a large capacity magazine by anyone other than a federal or state agent or armed services member or a member of state or local law enforcement. There is no reason for ordinary citizens to possess military-grade weapons. Second, this legislation promotes the safe storage of firearms. Safe storage of firearms is imperative to saving lives. This legislation will penalize those who fail to exercise due care in storing their firearms when they know or reasonably should know that a minor is able to gain access to them. Recognizing that there are residents who are safely storing their firearms, the legislation provides affirmative defenses for negligent homicide and negligent assault when a resident has properly stored their firearm. Lastly, this legislation addresses straw man sales of firearms and the role that they will play in guns falling into the hands of wrong individuals. This legislation provides and prohibits the reckless selling, lending, giving, or furnishing of a firearm to a person that is prohibited from possessing a firearm. Additionally, it criminalizes an individual who purchases or attempts to purchase a firearm, who intends to sell the firearm to a person who was prohibited from possessing a firearm. We know that this is not an overnight fix to an often evasive problem, but it is a step in the right direction to creating a safer Columbus. 5 months ago, we hosted a vigil to recognize Gun Violence Awareness Month. That night, my colleagues and I listened to and spoke to families and friends who lost their loved ones to gun violence in council chambers. I stood there and I felt helpless, but also ignited to continue this fight. I promised them that night that I would not stop advocating and fighting for real change and for stricter gun laws, so there won't have to be another mother, father, sister, daughter, friend that has to experience their loss. Today, we are able to fulfill their promise. To our families that have lost a loved one to gun violence, I cannot even begin to fathom the weight that you carry on your shoulders, the heaviness in your hearts, and the anger and the hurt that you hold. I am beyond sorry that you have had to experience something so painful. And I am sorry that we cannot take that hurt away. But I can promise you, this is not the end. I will not, and we will not stop here. Thank you for your continued strength, your advocacy, and your hope. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge and thank my former colleague, Councilmember Mitch Brown. These conversations started with him, and we would not be here without his leadership and work in this space. Finally, thank you to my colleagues, the team at the City Attorney's Office, the administration, Columbus Public Health, and our friends at the Columbus Division of Police and Fire for standing with us here today. With that, it's my honor to introduce my colleague, Councilmember Emmanuel Remy.
Thank you, Councilmember Favor. Good afternoon. The top concern of residents in Columbus share with the Columbus City Council its public safety. In fact, we know this is one of the top issues across the country, this state, and certainly right here in the city. The residents of Columbus, all of us, have the right to feel safe in our community. Our police officers, our firefighters, and first responders have the right to feel safe when they respond to a call. And assault weapons in our community threaten our safety, our community safety, and the safety of our first responders. To make our community safer, we need to tackle crime and calls for service from every direction. Alternative crisis response, a real-time crime center, and funding for 3 police and fire classes in 2023, legislation regarding assault weapons in Columbus. All of this is us working hard to tackle these areas in 2023 and beyond. I am thankful for the leadership and teamwork of everyone behind me here today. I look forward to working with my colleagues, Council President Hardin, Judicial Chair Shayla Favor, and I give you my word, we will do everything in our power to make Columbus a safer place for all of us. Thank you, and now I'll turn it over to Columbus Public Health Commissioner, Dr. Mashika Roberts.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Councilmember Remy. Columbus Public Health is proud to stand here with all of you today as we make a bold step forward in our efforts to protect the public through common sense policies that will reduce gun violence in our community. Looking at gun violence through a public health lens gives our collective efforts a different perspective as we work to address this crisis together. And since the court's injunction was issued, there is even more we can do to save lives and stop the scourge of violence right on our streets. The Board of Health spent the last 6 months learning as much as they could about this issue. From law enforcement, the city attorney's office, staff involved in this work throughout the city, neighborhood leaders, community members, and people who have personally been impacted by violence. After engaging with the community and learning as much as they could from diverse perspectives, the Board of Health developed recommendations that we believe will help reduce gun violence, build resilient neighborhoods, and support residents' health, well-being, and safety as a part of the city's comprehensive approach. We are pleased that Mayor Ginther has shown his commitment to this critical work through his proposed budget investments just announced on Monday, which includes a new Office of Violence Prevention in the mayor's office. These recommendations build on and enhance the great violence prevention and intervention work that the City of Columbus is already doing, such as neighborhood resiliency organizers, the More Life Partnership, and to provide trauma services to those families who are in need, as well as the Care Coalition. Additionally, with the recent court ruling, we also will be taking a fresh look at what more we can do with our existing programs, such as our gun lock program. The court's injunction allows us to do everything in our power to save lives. We know that there is no quick and easy fix to gun violence, but we are committed to working with all of our city partners to find long-term solutions that will make our community safer and healthier. Today's announcement gets us one step closer to that meaningful and common sense approach to those changes we need to protect residents from gun violence. But again, change will not happen overnight. But we are confident that when we work together, we will make a positive impact on gun violence in this community. We all know that this work is important, but our next guest knows firsthand the devastating consequences of gun violence and their victims and their loved ones. Please welcome Dr. Keshav Deshpande, a trauma surgeon at Ohio Health Grand Hospital. Dr. Deshpande?
Thank you, Dr. Roberts and Mayor Ginther and everyone else here for giving me the opportunity to share some of my thoughts and experiences about patients who have been injured by firearms. I'm a trauma surgeon at a level 1 trauma center here in Central Ohio, and I have the privilege to treat those who are experiencing the highest acuity injuries. And I'm always humbled by the tenacity, yet the fragility of the human body. While there are so many differing opinions on firearms themselves, I imagine most would at least agree that no one should die by gun violence. Trauma centers are seeing more patients with gunshot wounds in the last few years than ever in the recent history. I'd like to take a minute just to share a story of one young man that was treated by our trauma team. This patient was brought to Grant Medical Center by medics who responded to our city's shot spotter technology almost immediately. When the hospital was notified, we had roughly 4 minutes to prepare the hospital's most crucial resources and be ready to receive the patient. When the medics arrived, they relayed that the patient had a gunshot wound to the left side of his chest. He was sweating profusely. He was going in and out of consciousness. Just before we performed an emergency procedure to evacuate the blood that was in his chest, he turned around and he looked right at me, clear-minded, just as any of us here in this room, and he said, "Please, don't let me die. I have to get home to my son." And just like that, he went unconscious and he lost his pulses. As I was making my incision to open up his chest, I kept thinking, I really hope this son knows how much his dad loves him. When we exposed his lungs and his heart, almost instantly, 3 to 4 liters of blood just came pouring out, all over the bed, all over the floor. That little bullet wound that went through his chest had destroyed his lungs, and it had pierced into his heart. He had lost so much blood that his heart stopped. While I was repairing his heart, we were transfusing him blood with the hopes that maybe his heart might restart again. After a few units of blood and still no heartbeat, I had to make that decision to call it and pronounce the patient dead. I couldn't save that boy's dad that day. Walking from the trauma bay to the private room where our chaplains gather the family is sometimes one of the hardest parts of my job, because I know behind those doors, I have to tell someone that their loved one has died. That day, I witnessed a wife in complete disbelief, a mother that was just shaking from hundreds of emotions, I'm sure, a cousin that was just so mad at the world. And off to the side, there was a little boy, couldn't have been more than 2 years old, sitting on his grandma's lap, completely clueless that Daddy wasn't going to be there tonight at bedtime. His wife was completely grief-stricken, and she looked at me as she asked her next question, as if I was going to be able to give her a good answer. She asked, "What am I going to do now?" Sadly, this story is not a unique one. Trauma centers and trauma teams see this same story way too frequently. What am I going to do now that my best friend is gone, that the father of my child is gone, that my son is gone, the person I get to share my day with is gone? I get that question all the time, and I still don't have a good answer. I can say, though, for our community, it doesn't have to be this way. Thank you for your time, and I will turn the podium over to Assistant Chief Greg Bodker.
Thank you, Dr. Despande, one of the true heroes that our officers work with each day. Good afternoon. My name is Greg Bodker, Assistant Chief with the Columbus Division of Police. I've been asked here today to offer a law enforcement perspective. Gun violence is something that is all too real. Our officers and our families that we serve experience this each day in Columbus. As the mayor said, close to 90% of our homicides have been committed with firearms this year. Even those who often survive a shooting face life-altering injuries. This violence is even more disturbing when it involves young people in our community. These situations could often be avoided. Our city has seen an increase in homicide suspects and victims under the age of 18. Arguments that occur amongst children that often ended in hurt feelings now end in violence, often involving guns, and often leading to death. When children in our community have easy access to firearms, there's a problem. Every day, Columbus police officers work relentlessly to remove illegal guns from the streets. So far this year, officers have removed nearly 3,000 guns. That number puts us on track to beat last year's record high numbers of guns that were recovered, which was just over 3,000. The availability of illegal guns endangers not only Columbus residents, but also Columbus police officers. In 2021, from January 1st until November 9th, ShotSpotter technology identified 16 incidents of automatic gunfire in our monitored areas. Those 16 incidents had 137 rounds fired. During that same time period this year, there were 93 incidents of automatic gunfire, resulting in 933 rounds fired. Thanks to the dedication of our Columbus police officers and strong partnerships with the community, violent crime is down this year. And regular cooperation and tips from family members, witnesses, and community members and groups have led to increased solve rates. But our work is far from over. We won't be satisfied until everyone can walk through their neighborhood, play in their park without a fear of gunfire. We're not there yet, and we can't get there alone. I firmly believe that with the support of our community, the leaders behind me, and the hard work of Columbus police officers, we can make a meaningful difference in the safety of Columbus. Now I'd like to introduce Columbus Fire Chief Jeff Happ.
Thank you, Chief Bacher. Mayor Ginther, City Attorney Zach Klein, and to all my colleagues up here, thank you for inviting Columbus firefighters to the table. Deeply humbled to be here, having a conversation about all of our members in the fire service. And I'm just going to address it just a little bit differently, but it all comes back to the same thing. It's shots fired. Columbus Division of Fire is in the business of saving lives, period. Doesn't matter whether it's fire or a car accident or a heart attack or a shooting. Our job is to respond, to do everything in our power to save that life. It is the core of who we are and why we come to work each and every day. The only thing better than saving a life is preventing a life. That's why every day we work to educate our community about how to keep their families safe. This is more than our job. It's personal to us because we are on the front lines. We see firsthand the horrible outcomes when something goes wrong. And while we are professionals under these uniforms, we are still human beings. We feel the impact of these traumas. They are even tougher to accept when they are preventable. Every act of gun violence is preventable. It takes an emotional toll on our first responders. Our first responders see and respond to physical trauma of gunshot wounds and the emotional trauma of families who have been changed forever by a single pull of a trigger. Unlike so many victims of gun violence, at the end of their shift, our men and women get to go home to their families. But that trauma doesn't go away, especially when they have to do it all over again tomorrow or maybe even the same night, multiple times a day. Our first responders do a phenomenal job, and I couldn't be any more proud of them. We will always be there when you call for help. We would love to see fewer people having to make that call. And again, at this time, I'd like to thank Mayor Ginther for your continued support, to Council President Harden, and all the council members. You continually go above and beyond to support our members and everything you do. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us today and hearing all your different perspectives on how gun violence is one of the biggest challenges facing this city, communities around the country. But we have the power to do something about it. And so I'll close with a challenge to the people of Columbus. Come stand with our police officers, our firefighters, our public health experts, our trauma surgeons. Stand up. Republican, Democrat, Independent. This is not a partisan issue. This is a community issue, and we will solve it as a community. But we need you to get involved, to raise your voice, and to take action, and to fight for your community, your neighborhood, and your family. The time for talk is over. It's time to act. And Columbus is going to lead the way. Happy to answer any questions. Kevin?
Mayor, do you believe that this preliminary injunction would shield the city from lawsuits from those who are Second Amendment supporters? And do you plan on reaching out to firearms dealers in Columbus to see if they are willing to join you in this fight to limit magazines and assault weapons?
Well, we're looking for partners wherever we can find them. With respect to legal interpretations, my wife, who actually is a lawyer, says I practice law without a license every day. So I will yield to the city's lawyer to answer that legal question. But there are so many folks, huge Second Amendment supporters, gun owners, who are committed to common sense gun safety legislation. This far and ideological shift is very, very frustrating. I mean, there are huge bipartisan organizations, the Ohio Mayors Alliance, U.S. Conference of Mayors, gun safety groups, the FOP, FIRE, that have all come out against some of these measures that have taken place and support common sense gun safety legislation. And so we welcome gun owners that want common sense gun safety provisions in place to be part of this conversation. But, Counselor?
Yeah, sure. Kevin, I mean, the answer is because of the preliminary injunction, the only thing limiting the city from acting at this point is the Ohio Constitution, the United States Constitution, and then any other provision of the Ohio Revised Code that may be relevant. The reality is we have a green light, so as long as it doesn't infringe upon another part of either Ohio Revised Code, the Ohio Constitution, or the U.S. Constitution.
Sort of follow up what Kevin's asking. You have the green light now, but how long is it going to stay green?
Well, we can't predict what courts are going to do ultimately, and that's the reality. And just looking, talking very bluntly with everyone in this room, this is the first step in a long legal journey. The state of Ohio has already appealed the preliminary injunction. We feel the appeal is erroneous. We'll make our case why we feel that way, but we do have a window. How long the window is open, I do not know. But I encourage, as an elected official, as the city attorney in the city of Columbus, with the mayor, the council president, members of council, that we're going to act and do everything we can. Why we have the opportunity, because what is before us, gun violence in the United States, is completely preventable. It's completely preventable. We are the only country in the Western civilized world that has the significant amount of gun-related suicides, of gun-related homicides. It's not a Canadian problem, a European problem, a South American problem, an Australian problem, or even an Asian problem. It's a United States problem. And we have within our control to make a difference if we take a step back and figure out how we can find commonality while protecting the Second Amendment, a bedrock of our Constitution, but also finding the commonality of how we can have common sense gun safety measures. Something as sensible, Councilmember Favor, as safe storage of a gun at your home so your kids don't grab it and accidentally shoot someone. Is that a fringe idea? I don't think so. But folks are trying to stop us from doing that. And that's just wrong. That's one more life, one more child that's going to be at Grant. And our doctors are going to try to save that person's lives. And we may be on the other side of that waiting room, doctor, just because of recklessness and negligence, not because of an infringement upon a constitutional right. So we're going to do everything in our power to take advantage of what we can do in the city of Columbus while we have this window.
I think the only thing I would add is all the folks up here today took oaths, different oaths, but all of us to do everything in our power to protect, provide for health, safety, well-being. Different oaths, but all the same spirit. So we must act. This is not a matter of how long do we have. This is our moment. And the time for studies and discussion, and we've been waiting. The people of Columbus have been waiting, and we're done waiting.
Mayor, we talked to a mother who lost a child today who said, great, get the guns off the streets, that's a great step. But why doesn't the city do a better job of enforcing curfews? What's your answer to that?
Well, we have been very, very focused on violent crime. And the way that we have gone about reducing violent crime, as Chief Bodker talked about, is by having a focus on prevention, intervention, and enforcement. And so having our police officers really focus on enforcement. It's how we were able to take nearly 3,000 guns off the street this year, and why we've seen a 28% reduction in homicides and a reduction in violence overall as a city. We will continue to invest in intervention and prevention, and certainly open to ideas around curfew. I think all of us would agree that the best use of our uniform officers is on fighting violent crime in our neighborhoods and not rounding up teenagers.
This is probably a question for one of the city council people. Could you walk us through the nuts and bolts of how this will go through city council?
President Martin?
And will there be opportunity for public comment?
Certainly. Like we said, we will listen, but we will also act. In terms of timeline, council will provide more information about how folks can be engaged, but we understand that time is of the essence. And so, luckily, like we said, with Councilmember Favor's leadership, with Councilmember Ramey's leadership, with the city attorney, and I'm glad Councilmember Favor recognized former Councilmember Mitch Brown, we've been working on this legislation for a while. So we'll be ready to engage, roll out that proposal, and have the hearings and then vote in the very near future. Council will provide more information on the timeline.
I do want to add one more thing I just thought of. I put my dad hat back on. I do need curfew enforced. I need the moms and dads and aunties and uncles and grandparents of this community to step up, put a curfew in place, and enforce that curfew at your home. The city is doing everything we can to protect children, families, and make our neighborhoods safer. So I ask our parents, faith leaders, and others in the community to help step up and do their part as well.
Also, just to be clear, so if we get this passed fast, say whenever the timeline is, and then that appeal does go through and back to where we were before, that law or legislation will still stand here in Columbus if this case is appealed again?
So as long as the injunction's in place, it's currently a preliminary injunction, we have the opportunity to act. We will present a case eventually to make it a more permanent injunction while the case is pending, probably all the way up to the Ohio Supreme Court. So while we have that opportunity with the injunction in place, this is all open discussion and opportunity for the city so long as it doesn't violate other provisions of either a constitution or the Ohio Revised Code.
We'll stick around for one-on-ones. Thank you, guys.